A bright red key to freedom. The ignition hummed to life, a comforting sound that vibrated through Arthur's fingertips. He adjusted the mirror, catching his reflection, a man etched with the quiet perseverance of a life lived on his own terms. His bright red car, a modified sedan with hand controls, was more than just transportation, it was his freedom. Meadowbrook glided past in a blur of manicured lawns and blossoming dogwood trees. Arthur navigated the familiar streets with practiced ease, the hand controls responding smoothly to his touch. The library was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the hushed whispers of turning pages and the comforting scent of aging paper. Parking was always a challenge, but today luck was on his side. A space wide enough for his needs sat vacant near the entrance. He transferred from the driver's seat to his wheelchair, the familiar routine a dance between body and machine. The click of the wheelchair locking into place was a small victory. Inside, the library was cool and quiet, a welcome respite from the spring sunshine. Arthur inhaled deeply, the scent of books a soothing balm. He browsed the shelves, his fingers trailing along the spines, until he found what he was looking for, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. He added it to the small stack he was already carrying. As he paid at the checkout desk, Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, peered over her spectacles. "Arthur, dear? Lovely to see you. Finding some good reads?" "Always, Mrs. Henderson," he replied, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "This Roosevelt biography looks particularly interesting." "Oh, she was a remarkable woman," Mrs. Henderson agreed, her voice laced with admiration. "A true fighter." The exchange warmed Arthur. He cherished these small connections, these brief moments of shared humanity. On the way home, a craving hit him, blueberry muffins. He made a detour to Mrs. Higgins' Bakery, a small, family-run establishment that smelled of warm butter and sweet fruit. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and Mrs. Higgins, her face dusted with flour, greeted him with a cheerful, "Arthur, what can I get for you today?" "Just a half-dozen blueberry muffins, please, Mrs. Higgins," he said. She bustled around behind the counter, filling a small box with plump, blueberry-studded muffins. "These just came out of the oven," she said, handing him the box. "Still warm." The scent was intoxicating. He paid, resisting the urge to devour one immediately. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. They smell delicious." "Enjoy, dear," she called as he turned to leave. Back in his car, the warm box of muffins sat beside him. He took a deep breath, inhaling their sweet aroma. The sun warmed his face as he drove, the familiar landscape unfolding before him. Meadowbrook, despite its flaws, was his home. He had built a life here, a life of quiet independence, and he would not let anyone take that away from him. Turning onto his street, a sense of contentment washed over him. He could almost taste the warm muffins and the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, a promise of strength and resilience. His bright red key to freedom purred beneath him, carrying him home. Mr. Grumbles' grumpy decree. The fluorescent lights of the community center hummed, a soundtrack to Mr. Grumbles' perpetual discontent. Arthur usually avoided the HOA meetings like a dentist appointment, but a notice about landscape revisions piqued his interest. His little patch of petunias was his pride and joy. He sat in the back row, notepad and pen in hand, ready to defend their right to exist against whatever overly manicured vision Mr. Grumbles had conjured up this month. But the landscape wasn't the main event. Mr. Grumbles, a man whose face seemed permanently sculpted into a scowl, cleared his throat, the sound like gravel shifting. "Now, onto more pressing matters," he announced, his voice dripping with disapproval. "We've received numerous complaints regarding the aesthetics of a certain vehicle parked within our community." Arthur glanced around, wondering who had dared to violate the pristine, cookie-cutter perfection of Willow Creek Estates. He saw Mrs. Abernathy, her nose twitching with indignation, and Mr. Henderson, nodding sagely. Mr. Grumbles continued, his voice rising in pitch. "This vehicle, I say, this eyesore, is detracting from our property values. It's simply unacceptable." He puffed out his chest, surveying the room as if daring anyone to disagree. Then he pointed, a long, bony finger extended towards the window. "That monstrosity." Arthur followed the line of his finger, his stomach dropping like a stone. Parked innocently on the street, bathed in the late afternoon sun, was his beloved Volvo. The Volvo, with its slightly faded paint and the small dent above the left rear wheel, a souvenir from a rogue shopping cart. His Volvo, which represented freedom and independence, now labeled a monstrosity. A wave of heat rushed to Arthur's face. He gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout, to defend his car, but the words caught in his throat. He was never good at confrontations, especially not with loud, overbearing men like Mr. Grumbles. "It's old," Mr. Grumbles sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "It's lived in." He said the last two words as if they were a curse. Arthur swallowed hard, remembering the countless road trips, the camping gear crammed in the back, the smell of pine needles and campfire smoke that still lingered in the upholstery. His car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a repository of memories. The meeting droned on, a blur of legalese and complaints about overgrown hedges. Arthur barely registered any of it. All he could see was Mr. Grumbles' accusing finger, the harsh judgment in his eyes. Later that evening, as dusk settled over Willow Creek Estates, a shadowy figure moved through the quiet streets. The figure paused by Arthur's Volvo, glancing around furtively before pressing a bright yellow sticker onto the driver's side window. The sticker, barely visible in the dim light, bore a single, ominous word: tow. The figure melted back into the shadows, leaving the Volvo standing silently on the street, unaware of the impending doom. The car vanishes. Arthur patted his pockets, double-checking for his keys, phone, and wallet. Tonight was board game night at Daniel's, and he was actually looking forward to it. A small victory, he thought, pulling on his worn leather jacket. Usually, the prospect of socializing filled him with a low-grade anxiety, but Daniel's easygoing nature and ridiculous puns always managed to chip away at his reserve. He locked his apartment door, the click echoing in the otherwise silent hallway, and descended the stairs. The parking lot was dimly lit, the sodium lamps casting long, distorted shadows. He rounded the corner, keys already in hand, ready to unlock his trusty, if slightly battered, Ford Focus. Except it wasn't there. The space where his car should have been was empty. Just a rectangle of cracked asphalt marked by a few stray leaves. Arthur stopped, his breath catching in his throat. A wave of confusion washed over him, quickly followed by a prickle of panic. He looked around, scanning the other cars, half expecting to see his own parked haphazardly nearby, a victim of some late-night joyrider with terrible parallel parking skills. But no. He walked to the edge of the parking lot, peering into the darkness, hoping he'd simply misremembered where he'd parked. Nothing. Just the chain-link fence separating the complex from the busy street. His heart hammered against his ribs. Had it been stolen? The thought felt surreal, distant. He'd never even considered the possibility. He lived in a gated community, supposedly safe. Then a glint of yellow caught his eye. Tucked under the windshield wiper of the car parked next to where his had been was a small, official-looking envelope. He snatched it up, his hands trembling slightly. The words "parking violation notice" were printed in bold letters across the front. He ripped it open. The notice was terse and personal. Illegally parked. Repeated violations. Vehicle towed. A phone number and an address for the towing company were listed at the bottom. Rage, cold and sharp, began to bloom in his chest. Illegally parked? He'd parked in his assigned spot, the same spot he'd used for the past 3 years. Repeated violations? He'd never received a single warning, a single notice, anything. He sank onto the hood of a nearby car, the cold metal seeping through his jeans. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He called the towing company. The automated voice on the other end was maddeningly cheerful. He navigated through the endless menu options, finally reaching a human voice, gruff and impatient. "Penhaligon," he said, his voice tight. "Arthur Penhaligon. My car was just towed from my apartment complex. I need to know why." The man on the other end grunted. "Yeah, Penhaligon. HOA violations. Unpaid fines." "Unpaid fines? What fines?" "I haven't received any notices." "Doesn't matter. Car was towed. You want it back, you pay the fines and the towing fee. Cash only." The line went dead. Arthur stared blankly at his phone. Cash only? The sheer audacity of it. He felt a wave of helplessness wash over him, stronger than anything he'd felt in a long time. He was stranded, powerless, at the mercy of these vultures. He looked up at the dark sky, a smattering of stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. The air was cool against his skin, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and something else, something floral and sweet, a cruel reminder of the normalcy that was continuing all around him, oblivious to the injustice he was experiencing. He was alone. And he was angry. A spark of defiance. The bus wheezed to a stop a short walk from his building. Arthur descended into an evening thick with fumes and the reek of hot asphalt. Each step on the uneven pavement echoed the weight pressing down on him. His day had been a fruitless exercise in appeasement with Mrs. Henderson, the HOA president, a woman seemingly sculpted from granite. "Regulations are regulations, Mr. Penhaligon," she'd cooed, her voice a sugary trap with a metallic tang. Inside his apartment, the cramped space offered no comfort. The oppressive quiet amplified his sense of failure. He was trapped. His meager disability income barely covered the essentials, let alone the predatory towing fees. He collapsed into his ancient armchair, its springs emitting a mournful cry. But then a glimmer. An ember stirred within the cold ashes of his spirits. Defeat wasn't an option. He wouldn't simply surrender to their callousness. He recalled the hefty homeowner's manual he'd been given upon moving in, a veritable monument to bureaucratic absurdity. He'd only skimmed it then, dismissing it as irrelevant. Now it was his only possible recourse. He wrestled the binder from a dusty shelf, its pages thin and foxed with age. The fluorescent light above buzzed with irritating insistence as he immersed himself in the text, line after line, paragraph after paragraph. The legal jargon was a labyrinth, the clauses a convoluted maze, yet Arthur persisted. He underlined key phrases, scrawled notes in the margins, his brow a landscape of furrows. The hours dissolved. His eyes burned, his head pounded, but he drove onward. Around 2 a.m. a particular sentence detonated in his mind. Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 3, vehicles will only be impounded following a written notification affixed to the windshield at least 24 hours prior to removal, save for instances of emergency obstructing access. He reread it, his pulse quickening. No notification. They hadn't provided any notification. This wasn't an emergency. His vehicle wasn't impeding anyone. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy as he enlarged the photographs documenting his car's position outside the building on the day it vanished. There it was, undeniable. No telltale yellow slip beneath the wiper blade. No warning. Nothing. A jolt of adrenaline electrified him. They had violated their own charter. They couldn't simply snatch vehicles on a whim, no matter their personal parking preferences. A smile bloomed on his face, genuine and rare, the first he'd experienced all day. He settled back in his chair, the threadbare fabric sighing in response. He understood the path ahead would be arduous and steep. Mrs. Henderson wouldn't concede readily. But now he possessed something tangible. He possessed evidence. He possessed a fighting chance. The camera's lens focused tightly on Arthur's face. The weak illumination painted long shadows, emphasizing the resolute lines carved into his face. He looked drained, certainly, but also determined. The spark of defiance had caught, was beginning to blaze. Sunshine to the rescue. Arthur shuffled across the lawn, the morning sun mocking his despair. He paused at the vibrant yellow door 2 houses down, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Esmeralda, Miss Sunshine, Rodriguez answered, her face lighting up. Arthur? What a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in. I was just about to make some café con leche. He hesitated. Actually, Miss Sunshine, I need to talk to you about something. He swallowed, the words catching in his throat. He recounted everything, from the initial warning about the parking to the towing of his car, the blatant disregard for his disability permit, and the chilling letter from the HOA lawyer. Miss Sunshine's smile faded, replaced by a deep frown. Those vultures. Arthur, this is outrageous. They can't just bully people like that. She ushered him inside, the aroma of coffee now tinged with indignation. Tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave out a single detail. He repeated his story, this time with the comfort of knowing he was being heard, truly heard. Miss Sunshine listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally interjecting with a sharp, unbelievable, or a sympathetic, "Oh, Arthur, I'm so sorry." When he finished, she stood up, her eyes flashing. Okay, Arthur, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fight back. This is not right, and we're not going to let them get away with it. She grabbed a bright yellow notepad and a pen. First, we need evidence. Did anyone see the towing? Any witnesses? And that letter? Do you have it? Arthur nodded, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within him. He retrieved the letter from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly. Miss Sunshine read it, her lips thinning into a grim line. All right, let's start with the witnesses. I know Mrs. Gable always watches the street from her window. She sees everything. Together, they walked to Mrs. Gable's house, Miss Sunshine leading the charge. Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman with a penchant for floral print dresses, confirmed she had seen the tow truck taking Arthur's car. It was daylight, clear as anything. I saw the permit hanging right there. Shameful, absolutely shameful. Miss Sunshine scribbled furiously in her notepad. Perfect, Mrs. Gable. Thank you so much. Your testimony is invaluable. Next, they visited Mr. Henderson, a retired lawyer who lived across the street from Arthur. Mr. Henderson, initially hesitant, became incensed after hearing the details. This is a clear case of discrimination and overreach. The HOA has absolutely no right to do this. He offered to review the HOA bylaws and provide Arthur with legal advice. Buoyed by their success, Arthur felt a surge of determination. He wasn't alone. He had Miss Sunshine, Mrs. Gable, Mr. Henderson, and perhaps others willing to stand with him. "We're just getting started, Arthur," Miss Sunshine said, her voice ringing with confidence. "We're going to shine a light on their little scheme. They won't know what hit them." Unmasking Mr. Grumbles. Arthur felt the weight of Mr. Grumbles' decree like a physical burden pressing down on his shoulders as he limped beside Miss Sunshine. He was trapped, cornered, his freedom bartered away for a parking spot he desperately needed. But seeing the fire in Miss Sunshine's eyes, a spark flickered within him. He wasn't entirely alone. "Okay, Arthur," Miss Sunshine said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Operation Unmask Mr. Grumbles is a go." She pulled out a small, battered notebook and a pen from her oversized tote bag. "First, we need evidence. Solid, undeniable evidence of his Grumbles-ness." They started with Mrs. Higgins, whose prize-winning roses had been inexplicably pruned by Mr. Grumbles himself, deemed too ostentatious for the community garden. Mrs. Higgins, usually a vibrant woman, recounted the story with trembling hands, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Sunshine scribbled furiously, her pen scratching against the paper. Next, they found young Timmy, whose skateboard had been confiscated for endangering pedestrian traffic, even though Timmy swore he was practicing in an empty parking lot. Timmy, usually boisterous and full of energy, stared at the ground, kicking at a loose pebble. "He said I was a menace," Timmy mumbled, his voice thick with unshed tears. Miss Sunshine knelt, her hand gently squeezing Timmy's shoulder. "You're not a menace, Timmy. You're a great skateboarder." She added his story to her growing list. The afternoon dissolved into a montage of grievances. Mr. Grumbles' tyranny was a silent epidemic infecting every corner of the complex. A neighbor recounted how Mr. Grumbles fined her for having holiday decorations up past the acceptable time frame. Another told of being reprimanded for hanging laundry on their balcony. A young couple was threatened with eviction after their small dog barked for an excessive amount of time. Each story was a testament to Mr. Grumbles' pettiness and abuse of power. Miss Sunshine documented everything, her notebook filling with names, dates, and details. With each story, Arthur felt a fresh surge of anger, replacing his earlier despair. Mr. Grumbles wasn't just targeting him, he was terrorizing the entire community. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Miss Sunshine closed her notebook with a snap. "That's enough for today," she declared, her voice firm. "Tomorrow we start digging into the HOA records. I have a feeling Mr. Grumbles has been rewriting the rules to suit his own agenda." Arthur, buoyed by Miss Sunshine's unwavering determination, managed a small smile. "I'm with you," he said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Let's unmask him." Taking a stand in court. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse hummed, a discordant symphony to Arthur's churning stomach. He clutched the worn handle of his briefcase, its contents feeling less like legal ammunition and more like flimsy excuses. He'd envisioned this moment countless times, rehearsed arguments in the shower, debated Mr. Grumbles into oblivion in his mind. But the sterile reality of the courtroom with its polished wood and stern-faced clerk was a far cry from his imagined triumphs. He found his seat at the plaintiff's table, the wood cold beneath his trembling hands. Across the aisle, Mr. Grumbles sat ramrod straight, his gaze fixed on Arthur with an unsettling intensity. Beside him perched a severe-looking woman in a power suit, no doubt the HOA's high-priced lawyer. The bailiff's call for order snapped Arthur to attention. The judge, a woman with a kind face but piercing eyes, entered and the proceedings began. Arthur's lawyer, a young woman named Sarah, presented their case methodically, laying out the facts: Arthur's disability, the unlawful towing of his vehicle, the clear violation of parking regulations. Then it was Mr. Grumbles' turn. "Mr. Penhaligon's vehicle," Grumbles declared, his voice booming in the confined space, was not merely parked illegally. It was a blight on the community, a rusted eyesore that detracted from property values. Arthur bristled. His car wasn't new, but he meticulously maintained it. "Objection," Sarah interjected. "Irrelevant and inflammatory." The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Grumbles pressed on. "Furthermore, we have received numerous complaints about the vehicle. Residents felt it posed a safety hazard." "Lies," Arthur muttered under his breath, his hands clenching into fists. Sarah called Miss Sunshine to the stand. "Esmeralda Rodriguez, resplendent in a sunflower yellow dress, radiated warmth as she took the oath. "Ms. Rodriguez," Sarah began, "can you tell the court about your interactions with Mr. Penhaligon and his vehicle?" Ms. Sunshine's smile could melt glaciers. "Arthur is a wonderful neighbor. He always helps me carry my groceries, and he's always willing to lend a hand. And his car is perfectly fine. It's not a fancy new thing, but it's reliable, just like Arthur." She turned to face the judge. "This isn't about a car, Your Honor. It's about Mr. Grumbles trying to bully someone who's already struggling." Next, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived across the street, testified. She recounted how Arthur regularly shoveled her walkway in the winter and how he always had a kind word for her. Even young Timmy, the boy who lived next door, took the stand, fidgeting nervously. "Arthur lets me help him wash his car sometimes," he stammered. "It's not rusty. It's just old." Mr. Grumbles' lawyer tried to discredit the testimonies, painting them as biased and emotional. But the sincerity in their voices was undeniable. Arthur watched, a flicker of hope igniting within him. Maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. As Ms. Sunshine left the stand, she caught Arthur's eye and winked. He managed a weak smile, the knot in his stomach loosening ever so slightly. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in months, Arthur felt a surge of something akin to optimism. He was taking a stand, and he wasn't alone. Justice prevails. The courtroom felt colder today, the air thick with an anticipation that pressed down on Arthur's chest. He straightened his tie, the knot suddenly feeling too tight. He hadn't slept well, picturing his beloved Betsy crushed, a mangled heap of metal, all because of the HOA's petty vindictiveness. He took a shaky breath, clutching the manila folder containing his evidence. He watched Mrs. Abernathy, the HOA president, adjust her pearls and whisper something to her lawyer. Her smug expression only fueled Arthur's resolve. He wouldn't let them win. His lawyer, Ms. Chin, gave him a reassuring nod. "Ready, Arthur?" He nodded, throat dry. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, called the case. Ms. Chin presented their opening statement outlining the HOA's actions and the discriminatory nature of their vehicle removal policy. Then it was Arthur's turn. He rose, his knees protesting slightly. He approached the stand and swore to tell the truth, his voice wavering only slightly. He began by laying out the facts, the timeline of events, the increasingly hostile letters from the HOA. Then he pulled out the photographs. "These, Your Honor, are pictures of my car, Betsy," he said, holding up glossy prints. Taken the day before the HOA had it towed. The photos showed Betsy gleaming under the afternoon sun. He'd even given her a wash and wax that morning. No rust, no dents, just a lovingly maintained classic. He presented close-ups of the tires, showing ample tread, and the engine clean and well-oiled. As you can see, Betsy was in excellent condition. Certainly not a hazard, as the HOA claims. Arthur then detailed the importance of his car. "Your Honor, I live alone. I rely on Betsy for everything. Grocery shopping, doctor's appointments, visiting friends. Without her, I'm trapped. I become completely dependent on others, losing what little independence I have left." His voice cracked with emotion. He pointed to his cane, leaning against the table. "My mobility is already limited. Taking away my car is like taking away my legs." He spoke of the emotional toll, the isolation, the fear that gnawed at him. He saw a flicker of something akin to sympathy in the judge's eyes. Mrs. Abernathy's lawyer attempted a weak cross-examination, focusing on the HOA's right to maintain property values and insinuating that Arthur was exaggerating his dependence on the car. Arthur countered each point calmly, his voice gaining strength with each answer. Finally, both sides rested their cases. The judge adjourned for a short recess. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Arthur sat beside Ms. Chin, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When the judge returned, the courtroom hushed. She cleared her throat and fixed Mrs. Abernathy with a steely gaze. "The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that the HOA acted arbitrarily and without justification in removing Mr. Penhaligon's vehicle. Their claim that the car was a hazard is unsubstantiated. Furthermore, the court recognizes the significant hardship this action has caused Mr. Penhaligon." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Therefore," the judge continued, her voice resonating with authority, "I rule in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon. The HOA is hereby ordered to return Mr. Penhaligon's vehicle to him within 24 hours in the same condition it was in prior to its removal. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to issue a formal written apology to Mr. Penhaligon for their actions. A wave of relief washed over Arthur, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He had won. Justice finally prevailed. A brighter Meadowbrook. The key rattled in the ignition, a familiar, comforting sound. Arthur slid behind the wheel of his bright red car, inhaling the scent of leather and old road trips. It was home. He turned the key and the engine roared to life, a defiant rumble that echoed his own renewed spirit. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his reflection smiling back, a stark contrast to the weary face he'd seen there for weeks. He backed out of the courthouse parking lot, the steering wheel feeling like an extension of his own body. He didn't have a destination in mind, just the open road and the hum of the engine beneath him. He drove slowly through town, past the shops and the park, the sun glinting off the car's polished hood. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over him. He was free. As he approached Meadowbrook, a sense of anticipation bubbled inside him. He wondered how his neighbors would react. Would they still glare and whisper? Or would they finally see him as more than just a nuisance, a blight on their perfectly manicured lawns? He didn't have to wait long to find out. As he turned onto his street, he saw a group gathered near the community bulletin board. Miss Sunshine, her bright yellow sundress a splash of color against the green lawns, was the first to spot him. "Arthur," she called out, waving her arms enthusiastically. "You're back. We were just waiting for you." He parked the car and climbed out, a hesitant smile spreading across his face. As he walked towards the group, he noticed a printed notice tacked to the bulletin board. It was an official statement from the HOA, a public apology for their misunderstanding and a promise to revise their parking policies to be more inclusive and accommodating. "They actually apologized?" Arthur asked, incredulous. Miss Sunshine beamed. "They did. And they've promised to be more transparent and listen to the residents' concerns. It's a whole new HOA, Arthur. A brighter Meadowbrook." One by one, the neighbors came forward, offering handshakes and words of congratulations. Even Mrs. Davison, the notoriously strict HOA president, approached him, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. We owe you an apology. We were wrong and we are committed to doing better." Arthur nodded, accepting her apology with a mix of relief and satisfaction. He knew that changing the HOA's culture wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a start. A significant start. Miss Sunshine clapped her hands together, her eyes sparkling. "All right, everyone. Let's celebrate. I baked blueberry muffins." A chorus of cheers erupted, and Arthur found himself surrounded by his neighbors, laughing and sharing stories. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blueberry muffins and the sound of genuine camaraderie. He took a bite of a muffin, the warm, sweet flavor a perfect metaphor for the moment. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Meadowbrook, Arthur stood on his porch, watching his neighbors disperse. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had fought for what was right, and he had won. Not just for himself, but for everyone in Meadowbrook who had ever felt silenced or marginalized. He finally felt like he belonged. This was his home.